What's up, everyone? We are back for the third episode of Real Talk in its new format. I might just start renumbering these, and I consider this Real Talk 3 because this is what I wanted the show to be in the beginning. But we're here, and I am joined by someone who a lot of you, for the most part, have seen in streams. She is constantly in the chat for What the Show, and that's kind of where I got to know her a little bit. And then I followed her on Twitter, and she had some really interesting thoughts, and they're kind of involved into what we're going to delve into today. And that is none other than Legault.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Hope you are too.
You know, staying up till 3 a.m. and waking up at 7 doesn't do you great, but otherwise I'm fine.
Sleep, overrated.
Yeah, it really is. I remember I watched one of your videos leading up to this, and you're like, "Yeah, I've had like 3 cups of coffee, and I don't know if I've slept yet, but I'm doing good.
I mean, coffee really powers the brain. It's not sleep. That's a lie. It's propaganda.
That's fair. I'm not a coffee drinker, so that might explain why I don't have as broad as a brain as I'd like. But today we're going to be talking about something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and you being so vocal about things on Twitter, I was like, oh yeah, I should bring her on to talk about this. And that is sexualization of both women and men in film, and also the representation of the LGBT community in film and television, of course, just media in general. Because honestly, there's a lot to those spectrums that I feel like people overlook and don't give the full credit, or just realize how broad the issues can be, and they just fall into tropes of like, oh no, they have this issue because they're gay. No, it's a human issue, and it just so happens they're gay, or so on and so forth.
Or inverse, that they only have problems because they're gay, which is a big problem in terms of how queer characters are represented on screen.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna broach into the subject. I know I've had this conversation with my girlfriend because she is bisexual, and she gets annoyed sometimes when we're at a movie, and she's like, so the issue is that this person, so they're having all these issues just because they like women or they like men. It's like that's not how this works, but okay. I'm just like, I get it. It's hard to just sit there and see some of these issues play out on screen, especially I take it you are a part of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, so I'm not bi, so in terms of like bi representation, sometimes I miss that stuff too. I'm just a nice little gay out here doing the gay stuff.
So what are some of the things that you've noticed, and you can bring up some films specifically that just kind of get to you when it comes to that?
So in terms of movies, I've noticed a lot of times it's actually usually behind the scenes stuff that kind of bothers me the most. It's usually, are you familiar with Luca, which was
Yes.
a Pixar movie that came out in 2020, which everyone who watched it, especially those in the queer community, was like, this is absolutely, without a doubt, an allegory for the queer experience. Yeah. And the creator of Luca, Casaroca, really came down hard with a, no, that's not what this is, which is not great. I'm all for like author intent, but once you release something, you kind of had your chance to make it what it is. It's out there, and now it's all about how people interpret it themselves as viewers. And it's bothersome when you see someone behind the scenes being so adverse and to criticize people for interpreting something that they made the way they did, particularly when it's a whole community saying this represents us. That's not great at all. Or something like Anthony Mackie and his comments more recently about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and a lot of people pointing out, particularly as it pertains to Bucky, and this goes back, movies, many movies, on how people interpret Steve and Bucky and Anthony Mackie kind of during Pride Month, no less, giving this really long-winded speech about basically really just hating slash fiction. I'm oversimplifying, but it's you still see so much. I'm gonna call it subconscious homophobia behind the scenes, and I think that makes it realistic to see so much tropes and kind of negative opinions on queer people and just not getting things right when you know that there's so many people in terms of creators and writers and people higher up in the studios that just don't get it, so they don't care enough to bring on people who do understand it, and they want to give themselves a prize for, hey, we have a queer character, like in Loki, when he still ends up in a heteronormative relationship with himself-ish.
Yeah.
So it's just the lack of authentic representation that's displayed because everything is still going through a heteronormative lens.
You brought up Luca, and that film, I remember leading up to its release, a lot of people were calling it "Call Me by Your Name" for kids.
Yeah, calamari by your name.
Yes, and I was like, really? Okay, let's see how this plays out. And I definitely sit there, and it's easy to see that allegory, and it's like, but the director or the writer, you said it was it the writer or the director?
The creator, because it's an
creator?
animated thing.
Yeah. The creator is like, no, it's not. It's like, I agree with you to a certain point. You can say, oh, it's not because I created it, and then that's not what I had in my head. But once something's out there, it's going to be interpreted however people choose to interpret it. And the Anthony Mackie thing is a little bit frustrating because, like, you're playing Falcon. You should know that in the comics, Falcon was gay.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And like, if I remember correctly, he was one of the first gay characters in Marvel Comics. And I used to work at a comic shop, and it was brought up to me because around the time Winter Soldier came out, when he's first being introduced, and he's talking about his partner for parachuting, like, that might have been the guy that he was involved with, and that's why you see him be kind of a little choked up and teared up. And think about it, compared to Bucky or Steve, we've never seen him flirting or having any type of relationship. So you talk about Anthony Mackie and his, like, oh no, don't put that in there. Your character was gay at one point in the comics, and that would kind of be the perfect representation.
Yeah, I can understand, like, when an actor signs up to play a character and that wasn't necessarily what they signed up for, particularly as it pertains to television. I think that was a big issue on Supernatural, which I would cite as being one of the most, like, queer baity shows ever made.
I love Supernatural so much.
I do too. Until that last season, woof.
I'm not gonna lie, I haven't even, like, the season before the last season, that's one of those shows my girlfriend and I would watch together. Then we switched TV providers to YouTube TV. So I'm still, like, in the middle of season 12, I want to say. Like, yeah, I'm so behind, and I don't want, it's like, I want to finish it, but I don't, because it's when I know when I finish it, it's over, and that's it.
I don't think there was as many, like, really great memorable arcs in episodes in those later few seasons, but that's just me. But as it pertains to Supernatural, I think, and specifically the queer baiting, which, if people don't know, that's in terms, usually it's television, but it can be movies too. But I think overall, we usually talk about this as it pertains to TV. It's when characters are written and they're usually shown in such a way that there might be a relationship between two characters of the same sex, but while there's hinting and maybe even jokes about it, maybe statements about it in the context of the show, they never actually follow through with having them become a couple.
Dean and
very
Castiel.
famous. Yes. So very famously, there'd be Supernatural, Sherlock, Teen Wolf, I think, are like the biggest ones that have done this. But for Supernatural, that's the one I follow the most. I think, especially with like Jensen Ackles, who played Dean, who was one half of the duo that a lot of people say queer baited. I think that's not something that he signed up for, and in the end, he didn't really want the characters to go down that route. However, I do think the way that they talk about it outside of the show is unintentionally kind of homophobic. Like a lot of people, they just never got any like one-on-one on how to talk about this from their agents or from their PR rep, which they should have.
Yeah, no, and that seems to happen a lot with actors. And here's the thing: there's shipping, there's this, that, and the other. I know some people, which is stupid to me, but some people were upset when Marissa Tomei was like, "Oh yeah, I wanted Aunt May to be queer." She talked about, I had an idea before Happy that maybe Aunt May, or when she broke up with Happy, that maybe Aunt May had found someone else and it happened to be a woman. And I'm like, that actually would have been interesting to see, considering how different this iteration of Spider-Man has been. We've, over the last 20 years, we've basically seen every iteration of the Aunt May character, because there's not much to that character. So you can be a little bit more free, especially with how much you've played within the MCU version of Spider-Man. And I saw people were upset about that. I'm like, why? We're in a world where representation matters. And if an actor is willing to be like, let's push the boundaries a little bit and provide more representation, why shouldn't we do it?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I did like the Aunt May and Happy, but I think it would have been fun to see her doing something else as well. And as it pertains to Disney, that's a whole big conglomerate of queer sadness on screen that is happy to say that they don't do that during Pride Month when they slap a rainbow on everything. I guess I understand in terms of like, if we're looking historically at TV shows not really wanting to push the envelope, because that could mean getting advertisers pulled and literally not being able to have a show at all anymore.
Yeah.
So I can understand that argument up to a certain point, but as it becomes, we're entering more and more into this whole modern world and seeing so many successful shows and films get plenty of money that have queer representation in them. I don't think that's an excuse any longer.
No, and I agree, because like as much as closed-minded as the world can be sometimes it's just refreshing as all hell to just have that moment to see people who the characters care about each other, but just seeing that representation on screen. I know something I hated was when Netflix canceled Everything Sucks, which was like a newer version of their version of Freaks and Geeks. They did it like 4 or 5 years ago. And that was the first show I saw Sydney Sweeney on, who she's now one of the stars of Euphoria, but I'll get into that later. And she and the lead character, or the lead female character, ended up developing had decided they were going to develop a relationship. And that was in the final episode. And then it got canceled. I'm like, wait, no, like, what?
So that actually brings up a really interesting thing. There are certain like tropes that are kind of on-screen tropes, but they're also kind of off-screen tropes that queer people tend to fall into, which is one, you just mentioned, a last-minute gay, but I will give them the excuse of, I'm assuming they didn't know they were going to be canceled, so that wasn't intentional.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's done because that's the only way they can have it. I think it was Legend of Korra, I want to say, that they wanted to have these two female characters have a partnership, but they just were not allowed to do that. So in the last episode, they have them hold hands and walk off into a portal together, which at that point, they don't need to worry about critics. They don't need to worry about advertisers. They don't need to worry about anything because it's the last episode. So in the very last minute, they could do it. That's what Supernatural did. I'm sorry for spoiling anything. A lot of shows that aren't really able to do that will do it last minute, which isn't great per se.
Everything Sucks did not know they were going to get canceled. Legend of Korra was that show. You are correct, but something they did do is they did a continuation, and that was a comic, and they were explicit about their relationship in that comic.
Well,
Like,
that's
like
cool.
they're like,
Respect
no, they continued the story for about a year or two in comic form afterwards, because I think Legend of Korra, that wasn't supposed to be the series finale. It just ended up happening that way because a lot of people were, and I got into Legend of Korra way late, but a lot of people were upset because they're like, this isn't what I was expecting with the new Avatar show, and the ratings just kept dipping and dipping and dipping, and then finally towards the end started doing another spike up. But at that point, they've already made their mind up. They're canceling it. So how do you finish? Like Smallville, same thing. They did season 11. They did it as a comic. So comics have become a way where you can continue a story where you're not when you expect you get to be able to finish it, and then things happen and you can't. And I did enjoy reading up on Korra, and I forget who it's the daughter of the millionaire in Legend of Korra. I forget her name. Why it's kind of pissing me
Oh, I
off
don't
right now.
remember either.
But they end up having a relationship, and that's the person that Korra actually has a stable relationship with at that point. And I was like, that's really cool. I just wish I saw this on television, not in a comic.
I think comics are able to be a little bit more artistic with their choices. They don't have to go through as much red tape and bureaucracy as TV shows do.
No, and
Generally speaking.
I agree, because there are comics that just get graphic and say some crazy out there things, but that goes along with that territory. That's more of a free medium, because like cinema, they get like the A ratings for adult, at just the 18 plus, teens, all ages. But I feel like you're able to do more there, because ultimately it's not a motion visual medium. It's just still picture. So
Yeah.
you can draw the acts occurring rather than, but have it cut. Whereas film, you're still seeing the motion of the act, and that sets some people off. Which I know some people were upset about Eternals and some of the representation we got there, especially
With
Brian.
Fastos?
Yeah,
Really? I guess I didn't really notice that.
see, being black, I noticed it a lot more in the black community.
I see.
And it's one of those things where my buddy DeAndre and I were talking about this yesterday. The black community is a pretty is kind of closed minded at times, especially when it comes to LGBT issues, and that's why a lot of things are hidden. And it's weird because one of my good friends, he is he's like an older brother to me. He's like, I can't talk to a gay person. I'm like, why? I just can't. I'm like, what if it was a lesbian? He's like, well, maybe. I'm like, maybe yes. No,
Definitely a lot of double standards as it pertains to that.
exactly. Like, I think his thing is, and this is, I can't be mad at him. I can only try to show him where he's wrong, because at a certain point, it's just how he was raised because of what he was brought up around, and he didn't have people who were as open-minded about things because of that.
Do you think that comes from like harsher conformity to gender roles?
Yeah, that happens a lot more in the black community than it does in normal communities. I know some people make fun of Magic Johnson because his son is queer, and he's wears flamboyant clothing and this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay, so I'm let the person be proud to be themselves. If he wants to run around with the sign saying I'm gay, good for him. I'm not going to judge him because he's happy and comfortable with who he is as a person. Like, and that's something in the black, like, I know, and I know people, and this goes back to they have these issues because they are gay. I know people who have been cast out of their homes because they are gay in the black community. I've met a few in my time in school, and it's weird because it happens more so with the black fathers and sons than it does uh black fathers with black daughters. And I think it's because of what you just brought up of the gender role conformity type situations, because black fathers are very proud people, and to know that, to just the sense, I guess that their bloodline may not continue, or they think that their son is going to be taking it, or instead of all of that stuff just doesn't sit right in their mind at times, I think. And that's why we get that kind of feeling in the black community when it comes to that. Which is rough, but I feel fortunate enough to where I live in a household where I was in show choir. I got called gay all the time. It's like, no, I'm not gay. I just like the performing arts. Thanks. And I was lucky enough to my parents at a young age, when they realized how much I liked the arts, they're like, if you're gay, we're okay with it. I'm like, I'm not, but thank you for giving me that comfort if I was, because it's not normal in the African American community. It really isn't.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point when people assumed that you were queer because you liked show choir.
My family, we have tickets to, or we have season tickets to the theater down here, all that. I go to musicals, I go to plays. I was in show choir, I was in musicals and plays. There's a dark video of my senior year of show choir out there somewhere, where I had a solo singing Justin Bieber's Boyfriend. Yeah. A few people in this space have seen it. I won't say who.
The mistakes we make when we're young.
Well, like, it's a solo. It's a solo, and it's like, hey, this is the song we're performing. So if I want a solo, I gotta this. Okay, let's go for it, I guess. But yeah, all of us guys who were in show choir, it wasn't just me. All of us guys, people make fun of us. Like, oh, you're gay. It's like this, that, and the other. It's like, we're not, but okay. And unless you played football to go along with being in show choir, they really got on you. And I like watching football. I like playing football video games. I don't like playing the actual game myself.
So I'm the exact opposite. You couldn't catch me watching a football game, but I would definitely play. But that does bring up an interesting point in terms of how sometimes characters are stereotyped, particularly when they're written by people who aren't within that community. So I don't necessarily. Did you ever watch Glee?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
as a show choir kid, it felt like looking at a mirror at times, and it was.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, were there characters that you thought that were very representative of that after school activity class? I don't know what to call it.
It was extracurricular. For me personally, there was never anyone that was like, yeah, I feel like them. Well, I guess to a certain point, Finn, at times, even though I wasn't into football, I was into basketball, and some of my best friends were always on the basketball team. I tried out a couple times, but I'd still play with them and meet up with them after practice, and we'd play and whatnot. And sometimes they'd be like, man, if you stopped focusing on the show choir stuff, maybe you could actually make the team. It's like, but I like doing this stuff. Like, and like, that was the only character I ever personally saw myself relating to. But I'd look around at Chris Colfer's character. I forget, Kurt. There was a kid in my show choir named Tristan. He was gay, and Tristan was always similar to Kurt. A lot of us would watch Glee, and then we'd come in to practice one evening and talk about it and this, that, and the other. And he liked Glee at first, and then he kind of fell off of it. He's like, at times it feels too real, and I already feel sad at times, so I don't want to add on to that, like make myself sad by watching something that should be an escape.
Yes. So with what I'm saying, I'll bring it back around. I have this litmus test. I think I did tweet about it. That how you can tell if something is good queer representation versus bad. It's good queer representation if the character has problems and they are queer, meaning you've written a fully developed human being and they don't exist solely to be a queer representation on the show. Versus bad representation is they only have issues because they're gay. That's not good representation. Now, they can have sometimes problems because they're queer, especially the longer the show goes on. That makes sense. But I was recently watching, what was I watching? The Sex Lives of College Girls.
I haven't watched that yet. My girlfriend wants to, though.
I liked it overall. It was funny. But there is a queer character on the show. Her name is Leighton. I hope that's her name. I thought it was an odd name. I had never heard of it before, and so now I'm feeling like I maybe didn't name her correctly. That one. But anyway, sure, Leighton. She is gay, and she's rich and she's gay, and that's all we know about her. She doesn't have any problems stemming from her being wealthy, oddly enough, go figure. But she has lots of problems stemming from her being queer. And in fact, every problem she has comes back to her being queer. And she keeps saying she's in the closet. She doesn't want to come out. Totally fine. Very valid. But she keeps saying she doesn't want to come out because she doesn't want being gay to define her. Whereas in just pure hypocrisy, the writers made the only thing about her is she's gay. That's it. Whereas all the other characters are so much fully developed. And this is another issue that happens a lot as it pertains to particularly queer females in relationship with females, is that usually they're still written and filmed by and directed by men. So it comes off as even more uncanny, I guess. It's very not authentic. This show, it has a female and male creator and has been directed by both men and women and is written by all kinds of people, but still ends up to me coming off as very default. It still packages the queer couple as a very, you basically just said, we're basically making this a hetero couple. We're just going to make them both women, instead of having what would be, to me, a more authentic, lesbian experience, which is done a lot. I can't say that's what happens with male characters, as I've never been a dude, but I know it definitely happens with women a lot. Although I will applaud them for not fetishizing the two women together, whereas in a more masculine made product, that probably would have occurred.
As someone who I do write scripts, and I hope, even though I'm starting to focus more on my journalism and whatnot in my career, I still hope one day to make this one picture that I've been writing, and it's loosely based off of things that happened in my life. I had a friend who she was, or excuse me, well, I say was because we're not really, we broke our friendship off, and now we're kind of slowly rebuilding it. So I'll use past tense for this. But she was leaning towards, she admitted she leaned towards women, but she would never be honest with her family and would only date guys because she was afraid of getting kicked out. So there were plenty of times where she really wanted to date someone, and she's like, I'm just going to date this guy instead because I don't want to cause this issues at home with my family, and I'll try to make things work. And she still sadly is this way. I know this because I've been talking to her recently. And she's been with this guy for a year and a half or so, and she's like, it's kind of working, I guess. Like, a year and a half in, you shouldn't be saying it's kind of working. You should have a better idea of if it's working or not. Clearly, it's not working. But there was a character I wrote that was loosely based off of her. And whenever I've written a queer character or anything, the first thing I do when I'm writing, when I have portions of it done, is I give it to someone who's a part of that community. Because I think that's the best thing you can do, especially as a writer who's not a part of that community. Like you said you've never been a dude. I've never been a lesbian. So I can't say Like, I can't be like, oh yeah, this is what would happen. It's like, no, I here, you read this, tell me how this sounds, I'll make changes as I need to be. And I you brought up the pairing was like a hetero couple basically, who but it was just two women instead of an actual hetero couple. I
They were in a
think,
heteronormative
yeah,
situation, if that makes sense.
okay, yeah. So the situation, I can actually send you the script, what the half of the screenplay I have. Situation that I had them in is more so, and this is part of the reason I wanted you on, because you made me start thinking about this script more and possibly rewriting it. Is it has we get the character's little history, and then there's a time jump to where the present, because we get a flashback to the past. But she's basically, her issues aren't all because she's gay. It's because of how she's been treated by people, like her family casting her off. Because of the fact she was gay, she's got trust issues now because of it. But there's also other human issues, like she was cheated on, this and things like that, where it's not all because she's gay, but that's just a small piece of it, if you know what I mean, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think most, just in real life, most people don't have problems because they're queer. They have problems because of society's demonizing of that.
Yes.
I personally make the distinction, though not everyone does. When it comes to film, oftentimes we do see queer people and characters framed, particularly trans people, framed in a very depressing light. There's a whole trope called bury your gays on film and television, because to a just remarkably degree more queer characters are killed off at a ridiculous rate. I just think I like to see sometimes, just every now and then, queer characters shown in a way that they're allowed to have happy lives and existences, because most do, particularly once we get to adulthood. I mean, when you have teenagers, everything's depressing for a teenager. That's fair. But once you get to adulthood, generally speaking, that shouldn't be as big of an issue.
Yeah, and I can say ultimately ends up in a happy situation, but ideally it was more. The idea was basically more so a relationship thing, where she ends up not trusting herself and questions things, even though she just got engaged to her partner, and she was acting out of fear for the future kind of situation. And none of it was because would be because she was queer. It was just the uncertainty of life.
Yeah. What's interesting things when you look at like romance, just movies, TV, whatever, whether it's a rom-com, a dram-rom, or just an outright romance, usually those depict very unhealthy relationships, because that's where the conflict for the story has to come from. So to find a healthy relationship, usually you have to look outside of that genre. And I don't know, I guess sitcoms sometimes have good relationships. I still say Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv probably have the best TV marriage. That's just my opinion.
You officially have a lifetime invite to the cookout.
I was watching a whole documentary on the Fresh Prince there, and top of my mind.
No, I will say this: her partner. So the thing I thought made it interesting is her partner was kind of the foil for her, because her partner, the way I wrote it, had the parents that were more accepting of it, had the life you'd want, and that's kind of where the friction between them came into place, because one got to have the support while the other had to learn how to support themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that can definitely cause conflict in a relationship.
Yeah,
especially if other things, particularly like financial issues, come up, or like stuff like that, which kind of brings it to the forefront. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I used the partner who had everything proposing as kind of the jumping off point, because that, even though that's more so the side story, it still plays an important part, because once again, slightly based off of stuff that's happened to me or other people in my life. I can tell you right now, the script was called Oreo because I'm mixed. So there's a line, and I remember writing in the beginning. It's like, I've always been called an Oreo. I'm because I'm a well-educated African American man, even though I'm mixed. When people see me, they don't see mixed. They're like, "Oh no, you're black." That's just how it is. And you're educated, and black people tell me, "Oh, you act like you're white." So I've always been told I'm black on the outside, white on the inside, and that's what the Oreo as a derogatory term is. So yeah, I might actually have to send that to you to get your thoughts, just because
I'd be interested.
yeah.
But that what you brought up was actually an interesting thing of gatekeeping within a community.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely happens a lot in the queer community. Unfortunately, I like to think it's from outside forces, trying to keep us infighting so we don't actually rise up. Or maybe I just like saying rise up. One of those things. One of those things. Both of those things.
You're not wrong. I feel the same way about a lot of community. I mean, hell, you are like a Schmodown community adjacent, and you see how that there's a lot of gatekeeping inside of that community.
Yes. I mean, all communities have some amount of gatekeeping within them, which is unfortunate. But in terms when it like, do you notice conversations regarding like how different people are depicted as it pertains to like other characters who are like mixed on like sitcoms or TV, and do you notice any like gatekeeping that in the show itself that's like they're writing it that way because of this?
Yeah, there are times where I'm like, I know they're writing it this way because I would write it this way, because ultimately that's going to end up playing into the conflict. You already brought up Fresh Prince. One of my favorite episodes of all time is when he and Will are in college and they're pledging for the fraternity, and there's that gatekeeping situation where the house lead or the leader of the fraternity was basically like, "Oh, I'm going on harder on Carlton on purpose because he's lived this luxurious life and he doesn't know what it really means to be black." And it's like, he's still black, whether it doesn't matter where he came from or what his history is, he's still black. And I got called Carlton a lot growing up because what I just explained, it happens, and it's sad that it happens, but it's the world we live
in. So I don't necessarily see it displayed and it might just be because I watch different things, so I just haven't seen it, but I don't necessarily see that displayed on screen very much, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But there's definitely times where I'm watching something and I'll notice, who they've cast to play a certain character, and you could tell that like they portray this, lesbian as what would be called femme or lipstick, because that's probably more palatable for viewers rather than having one who's butch or more presenting or masculine. Sorry, people don't watch things a lot.
I know exactly what you mean, because this is how I had to think about it when writing.
Yes, it's not always, that stuff's not always easy. But there are times where it just gets eye rolling. Like they made a movie about Stonewall, but all of the trans characters and all of the people of color take a back seat for just a gay white boy, and like that to like tell the story. Like that's very not what Stonewall was.
Yeah, no, just no. Don't do that.
So yeah, there's you can tell a lot of times that I think one of the things that I was talking about recently was the male gaze, which if people don't know, this is a term created by a writer, a psychologist and feminist, Laura Mulvey, in I think 1973, but some people cite 75. I wasn't alive in the 70s, so somewhere between 73 and 75, she created this term, the male gaze. And what this is, a lot of people kind of mistake it for just females being objectified on screen. That's not fully what it is, although it is kind of what it is.
Yeah.
It is partially females being viewed as objects on screen in the actual like physical filming. Like I'm sure we've all seen like a head to toe shot of a woman wearing something sexy on screen.
Yeah.
But it's also in the writing of women being objectified. I personally like to use the example of really any Indiana Jones movies. Um, Female characters, particularly in action films, are
Always objectified.
afterthoughts. They're written in this. I'm sorry, this is a little vulgar, but like they're basically holes for the men to put their phallic symbol into. That's why if they have any actual characterization, it's an afterthought. So the male gaze comes from movies being written, directed, filmed largely by men. That was true in the 70s, very much so, and is still overwhelmingly true today. You can make an argument that there is a female gaze. And that's just a conversation. I personally come down that there cannot be a female gaze because we live in a male-dominated society. It doesn't exist. It's similar to the argument of, can a black man be racist towards a white man in America? I come down on no, because that's not the power dynamic. And generally those things have to deal with the power dynamic on display. So as it pertains to the male gaze, I've recently made a comparison of Magic Mike, with some people wanting to assert that that's a female gaze. No, because it's still directed by a guy and filmed by a guy, and I'm pretty sure written by a guy, though I'm not entirely sure who wrote it.
If I remember correctly, the Magic Mike series is loosely based off of Channing Tatum's life before he was an actor.
That's interesting.
If I remember correctly, I haven't it's been years since I read that somewhere, and that was around the time the first movie came out. So it's been almost 10 years.
So I remember he started off in like dance movies, so I'll believe it. He started off in those like step up movies.
Yeah, he started off in the step up movies, and she's all that. She's the man. She's the man.
Yeah,
Amanda Bynes. There we go.
That seems like that was so long ago.
Right.
That seems like a lifetime ago, really.
Yeah, it makes you feel old because you think about that. You're like, I was like 10, 11 when that came out, and I'm now 27. I don't know how old you are.
I'm older than you. You just made me feel old.
See, you don't look it. I thought you were like 24, 25. So
I'll take that, plus a variable. It's whatever. Who knows what X is? Try and solve it. You never will.
No, but
letters and math.
And see, what you just brought up is kind of a perfect segue, because I do want to talk about the sexualization of women and men in film. And I know I was talking to you a little bit before this about Euphoria, which I have an after show for on this channel that'll actually be airing right after this. But that's a show where it's weird, because I agree with you. It's no matter what, unless it's a female written and directed project, that's still from the male gaze. And Euphoria, while I can't remember if Sam Levinson has directed every episode, he's still the creator. And ultimately, there's a lot of graphic sex scenes and nudity, but when there is nudity, for the most part, they try to do it in that he's directed 10 of the 14 episodes that have been released. Yeah, so, and the majority in all of this season. So yeah, it's the male gaze. But like sometimes it's the romanticizing shot. Sometimes like this past week, there was just like rough sex, and it's like, oh, okay. And but at the same time, it's not like one of the complaints people have with Game of Thrones, where I don't know if you watched Game of Thrones or not.
No.
But a lot of people complain that sometimes it felt like women were naked in that show just to be naked in the show. And part of the reason I don't watch The Witcher, because I didn't care for the first season, but I felt like that show did it worse, because I remember watching it, one of the first episodes of the first season, and Yennefer's standing there and she's having a spat with someone, and and it's after they just had sex, and she's just still standing there naked. He's putting clothes on, like he's getting dressed, but she's just standing there naked. I'm like, shouldn't like she also be getting clothed? Why is she delivering this monologue nude while he's being able to put clothes on? I get she's an attractive attractive woman, but how come she has to be nude and he can put clothes on? There's certain things there. And Euphoria, part of the reason I respect it so much is they're like, no, you're gonna see dicks in this. You like boobs, cool. You don't like dicks, too bad. Here they are. And it's like, okay. It's one of the times that I realized, okay, this is what the show's gonna be. Screw it, I'm here for the ride. It's season 1 when Rue is doing like a dissertation of dick pics, and they just flash a montage of erect penises on screen, and you're just like, whoa, okay, didn't expect that. But let's see where this goes, I guess. And it's a very good character study, but I like how it kind of is equal opportunity in that way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely better. Not necessarily
it's not
great,
great.
But better.
It's not great, but it's better. It's because, I mean, it's not like you're just objectifying one group rather than. And to be fair, the show's also kind of about self-exploration, because there are a lot of characters on it figuring out themselves and their sexuality and where they lie on this spectrum.
That's good. I think it's interesting when you look at like when you're able to juxtapose a male director versus a female director on something similar.
You mean like Justice League and Wonder Woman?
Well, that's one. That's an interesting one. I was actually going to go a different way. I was going to go with. Well, now I forgot. No, but an interesting thing to look at is, for instance, how males will depict assault versus how female directors depict it. Which generally speaking, I think female directors might have a little more, not necessarily experience, or maybe experience, unfortunately, but they'll certainly be more in tune to that feeling than a male director.
Have you seen The Last Duel?
I was actually going to bring that up. So I didn't watch all of it. I just watched clips, but I watched the one I needed to.
Okay. I as a critic, I reviewed that film, and I will say this: I praise Ridley Scott for being brave enough to show the juxtaposition of it. Like he didn't hold back, and I think that's one of the brave things he did about that, because it really pissed me off initially that I had to sit through the rape twice, and then for Adam Driver's character is like, oh, it's being depicted as not a rape, and I was like, I'm ready to walk out this damn movie. Like, I can't, because I got to finish this to do a full review. But I was very uncomfortable, and then I was even more uncomfortable, but in a good way, when we see her truth. And I love how when they're like, this is her truth, and then her truth fades away and it says the truth.
I came down on a harsh dislike. That's just me.
No, I disliked those scenes. I said it in my review, but I understood why he did it.
There's one, I think, like maybe my biggest issue is how often women, and specifically women's trauma, is utilized as a action for the male to like launch them into their story. That's very old. Maybe we could stop doing that. I know they're not redoing, because they've never had a cinematic version of it. I know they're telling a cinematic version of the video game Dragon's Lair.
Yeah.
Which depicts Princess Daphne being, if you don't know, caught in a bubble by a dragon, and the prince, whose name I don't know, comes and rescues her. This is a very old method of storytelling that we should retire. But especially when it comes to like assaults, it's just not necessary. And
I agree with you 110%. Actually, I think with the last duel, the reason I was a little more on board with it is because it is a historical event that actually occurred. If that makes sense.
I'm willing to give that a little leeway, but like when you look at Ridley Scott's, I guess because I think I'm maybe biased by his comments, or he was talking about millennials are the reason this movie didn't make money. It's like, well, maybe it's because you depicted an assault scene in a period piece movie that's a he said she said. Maybe we just don't want to watch that.
Depicted it twice, mind you.
Yeah, but what I was going for originally was that generally speaking, when women make movies like that, they won't actually show the assault. If I don't know if you had the displeasure or pleasure of watching the 2019 Black Christmas.
I'm not gonna lie, I just started watching horror movies with Get Out, so I'm still very selective about horror films.
That is very, very fair. I like many queer people. I'm a stereotype. I love horror movies, especially campy ones. More campy, more better. But I did watch the 2019 Black Christmas, and a lot of people didn't like it, which I understand their reasoning. I came down being on it. But there is a character who is experiencing trauma after having been assaulted, but the assault is never shown. It's kind of briefly maybe depicted with the guy talking to her, but it's not shown. And usually that's rare because typically men will depict it. And that might, for a lot of these things, they can go back to like the history of cinema, wherein obviously we were at one point not allowed to depict sex at all on screen to the fall of the Hays Code in the late 60s. So now we can, but now we're getting like this whole sexual revolution thing and women are trying to get their rights. So let's have rape revenge movies. So we can at once put women in their place, but also let them be kind of empowered too. And then we get
funny. I actually said I would have preferred if instead of depicting it, they just close the door and leave it at that.
So that would be just as good. And it's interesting because when you see, like I said, when women do stuff like that, that's generally what they'll do. So I think an interesting look is a book written by a woman, but a movie directed by a man, Peter Jackson, who is awesome. The Lovely Bones. I mean, obviously this was Saoirse Ronan plays the girl, so she is young, but I've certainly seen younger child actors depict being sexually assaulted, which is really weird. But anyway, and it cuts away before there's assault, and I don't think they mention it, but you know that that's what happened. It is not explicit, but it tells you enough that you know that's what happened. And her murder, that isn't just the dad's story now. It's also the sisters and the mothers, and it's also still hers in the afterlife. Yeah. And I think that's one of the best depictions of that type of scenario to ever be committed to film.
Yeah. I will say this in regards to The Last Duel, and I think did you know that her story, so Matt Damon and Ben Affleck wrote that script is written by three people, one being a woman. Matt Damon took his character's his story. He wrote that portion. Ben Affleck was originally going to play Adam Driver's character. He wrote that person's story. The third screenwriter is a woman, and she wrote her story, and that is the one where we see the extremely graphic depiction of the rape. So I don't know if you knew that, so I did want to throw that.
That would be an outlier. I'm just looking at like overall, usually women don't do that.
Yeah, so I know you're like Ridley Scott, maybe we don't want to see. I was like, I'm pretty sure the only reason that was put in is because she put it in that.
Now, did she just write something and he took it that way? Because
no, I mean, I think I'll have to get my hands on the script. It's a rough movie to watch. I said that in my review. It is a rough movie to watch. The entire thing's on HBO Max right now. But considering listening to interviews Matt and Ben did after the fact, because like I said, they wrote it. Scott's just the one who directed and produced it. They felt it was important that anything that was involved her was written by a woman, and then they respected what she wrote. So I'd have to hear from her. Maybe I got to dig
So I can
down.
only think of one other director who has shown an actual assault. And even then, that was a little bit of a weird thing. I think it's Boys Don't Cry, which is about, I think
Yes,
Hilary Swank plays a trans man, and that was a real story as well.
yeah,
But I think in that, they were, trying to make, there is something with like shock value. So I guess that might have
yeah.
to do with it. But
I,
typically, women directors won't show that.
I remember I watched The Sopranos leading up to the Many Saints of Newark, so I could actually have feet to stand on when I did that review. And I literally was like, there's one episode where his therapist, Dr. Melfi, gets sexually assaulted in the parking lot, and I was very disturbed by that. And I was like, I didn't need to see, like, it's literally happens in the stairwell of a parking garage. The person basically tackles her to the stairs and just does what he does, and just like it's I get, sometimes I understand why directors do it, but I'm very much on the side of you where I don't need to see it. But I guess in the case of The Last Duel, where they were trying to make that an awards bait film, they thought maybe this
Yeah,
would
that makes
help
it
us.
worse.
Yeah, yeah.
I
That's
think
why I
a more
said it.
interesting way to have done it is to leave it open ended
Yes,
and keep it a he said she said. And at the very end, right, she was telling the truth. If you didn't think that, maybe you should examine your biases.
yes. And I know I just but let's we just touched on a little bit of heart. Let's back it up a little bit. I know I mentioned Justice League versus Wonder Woman. Something
Yes.
that has always bugged me since I saw Justice League is I'll say this. I love the fact they use Olympic level athletes as the Amazons. That is amazing, cool, awesome. Why are they like fully armored and clothed in Wonder Woman, and in Justice League they're like wearing armored bikinis?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was on
It
actually.
came off a little Michael Bay.
Yes, very much so. But Zack Snyder is just a more artistic Michael Bay, in my opinion.
Yes.
So,
Yes, agreed.
granted, I will say this: I enjoy his director's cuts, I guess, because when my biggest complaint about him is you can't make a solid film within like the amount of normal time you need to watch a film. If you watch his director's cuts or his extended cuts, you're like, man, I wish I saw that in theaters because he actually told a full story. But I got the theatrical cut and it's a piece of crap.
That's how I felt about Batman v Superman, but I
Yeah.
haven't seen the extended one yet.
See, the extended one is an extra 30 minutes. What was that actress's name that we all thought was going to be Barbara Gordon? Jenna. She was in Sucker Punch.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I can't think of her name either.
She played the younger
Malone?
sister.
Jenna Malone?
Jenna Malone. Yes, that's exactly what it is. We see her like there's a lot more that of detail and whatnot in those 30 minutes that help flesh out the story more. It's still not a great movie, but I look back at Justice League compared to Zack Snyder's Justice League, where I'm like, that is a completely different film, and it made those 2 extra hours made a world of difference.
Sometimes I just have really nitpicky things, but a big thing for me, and it's in so many of these like female warrior movies, where they have like a chest plate that separates each
Yes,
breast, which is
yes.
you just kind of sitting there like that's first of all no. Secondly, that must be uncomfortable to wear.
So funny you mentioned that because my brother bought Deadpool the video game, and it just came today and he was playing it, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, he's playing like the second level and he's fighting this female character and I forget the character's name. But there was a lot of like close-ups that was strictly chest up, and it was like, and she had larger breasts, and I'm like, why? What's the point of shooting it that way specifically? Just and I was like, I laughed. I'm like, funny enough, I'm probably going to be talking about this in an hour or so. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, so you said you didn't really watch horror movies. I love horror movies, and
I used to not.
have you seen Scream?
Change that. Yeah. Oh, Scream. The Scream franchise is my favorite horror franchise.
Okay, so
I discovered it last year. I got all four on the first one on 4K because it had just dropped on 4K, and the other 3 on Blu-ray for my birthday. And I keep bugging my girlfriend because I've already seen it, the 5th one, to review it, and I want to see it again, and she hasn't seen it yet, and I know she wants to. I'm like, look, we need to see this. I want to see it again. You want to see it? Let's make this happen.
Yes. Well, Randy, when he's talking about
yes.
before he's talking about his rule, they're watching Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis, and they're talking about the obligatory tit shot.
Yes.
And that is something that very much is in the horror genre. Well, not necessarily the horror genre, slasher movies. That's something very much in the slasher movies. You don't necessarily see those so much in like haunted house movies or stuff like that. Possession movies, not so much, because that's usually like body transformation and body horror. But the slasher movies absolutely do have a lot of exposed flesh, and it's usually of the female variety.
Mm-hmm.
Horror movies are really interesting to me because that is simultaneously, specifically slashers, that's simultaneously where I think you get the most female violence, and simultaneously the one place where women actually get to be action heroes, which is pretty fun. So it's like simultaneously the most female empowering and the most misogynistic, which is just very fun. And especially the lower budget you go, which I don't know what it is about a low budget B horror movie and sexual assault scenes, but boy, are there a lot of them. like an absurd amount.
Taylor Cleek and Connor Breedlove, the hosts of the horror show on this channel, Really Scared, they've talked about this. They did a Halloween because the month of Halloween they went on a hiatus. The month of Halloween they did a Halloween movie in the Halloween series every week. And Halloween 3 they were like, why is there so much boob? So much boob. Like Michael Myers isn't even in this one, and there's so much boob.
Yes. So I don't necessarily know what started the female survivor. I guess it kind of was Halloween. Like that was like the
first real slasher. That was what the film that started the slasher genre.
Well, the teen slasher. I mean, slasher goes back a little before that, because I mean, technically, Psycho would be a slasher. But that was the one that started all the tropes that we see that just got replicated and replicated and replicated because of its success. And I'm assuming, like we saw with Psycho, when you have a person in the shower, that's a very vulnerable position to be in. It's very hard to defend yourself in the shower when you don't have any clothes on. And the similar situation would arise after someone has had sex. You are not in a situation that you're able as easily to defend yourself, to run out the door and get help. Like that is definitely, unless you're Linnea Quigley, in which case, sure, why not? You probably didn't get that reference. I'm so sorry.
What film is that referencing? Just
she's in a lot of movies, and she's very well known for being nude in them. She's in Silent Night, Deadly Night. She's in, most famously probably would be Return of the Living Dead, I think from 1988, zombie movie, which is like one of the best zombie movies ever made after Train to Busan.
That's one of the George Romero ones, right?
No, that's one of the ones he didn't do.
Okay.
So he and his partner made the Night of the Living Dead. Then they went their separate ways, but his partner retained the Of the Living Dead title, and that's why the rest of his Romeros don't have that in the title. It's a weird thing.
There was one Romero film I actually had to watch for my it was film history class. No, it wasn't Night of the Living Dead. It was whichever one had like Buck in it. Buck, like they were trying to humanize zombies to a certain degree.
I think that was Day of the Dead, when they're on the military base.
Yep, Day of the Dead. That is exactly what it is.
saying Dawn of the Dead is famous for being the one that's at the mall.
Yes.
And I think Zack Snyder remade it.
Yeah, that's the movie that set off his career.
Yeah. These zombie movies are fun.
Yeah, no, I just mean like things you wish didn't happen. Zack Snyder's career getting set off on the path it did. Ooh, did I say that?
I'm assuming you didn't watch his recent one. What was it? Army of the Dead?
Oh no, I hated Army of the Dead. I'm like, this is good fun, but I didn't need to see zombie strippers running around or a zombie like there's an opening credits. There's zombie strippers and a zombie hooker within the 5-6 minute opening credit sequence, and I was like,
fun B movies. There is a zombie strippers movie. I think there's a werewolf strippers movie. There's Hollywood chainsaw hookers. All kinds of fun B horror movies.
I have heard of Hollywood chainsaw hookers, but I was just like, with Zack Snyder, I'm like, he's doing this just because. I think part of my issue was those scenes were also in slow mo.
He does love a slow mo scene.
I think he loves slow mo in general. If he could make an entire movie in slow mo, he would. I'm pretty sure the Snyder cut. If you cut down half of those slow mo scenes, you lose 15 minutes of that movie.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a bit excessive, for sure. But that does go to a bit of like Hitchcock. There's a lot of voyeurism in his movies, and I think with Hitchcock it was a bit more obvious and I think purposeful. But with Snyder, I don't know. I mean, he's not he's not as bad as Michael Bay, but it's not like as in your face. I feel like as Michael Bay, and it's not always Megan Fox, but so he has a little variety there. But it's a bit ridiculous. And we're going back to Wonder Woman. What's her name? Catherine. Yes, she was even talking about the disappointment that she had that when she saw Wonder Woman in his movie, like what she was wearing.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. Like,
but I think there's a conversation. I'm not as big of a fan with Wonder Woman as I am Supergirl. I do love all of those CW shows.
Yes.
I think the CW does have a lot of fun instances of representation in terms of the queer community, especially like in the Arrowverse with Legends of Tomorrow. But I do think there's an interesting conversation when we have Kara. I think it was the 5th season. She finally got pants instead of wearing a skirt.
Yeah.
It might have been the 4th season.
No, you're correct. Finished with season 6, right? Yeah. So the 4th season, that like evil Kara had the suit with pants, and then they repurposed it for the 5th season. I remember that specifically. Yes,
and I think it's a little, I don't know, because there's this. If anyone has seen the publicity that M&M's put out, where they took away the green M&M's booths.
Oh God! Did you see the picture that's going around somebody made of the M&M without the green?
It's cover? Terrifying.
No, I was
my eyes will never unsee it.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through Twitter last night and I screamed, "What the hell?" and dropped my phone.
I didn't have quite that reaction, but I was like, well, that's not something I ever needed to see, and now I'll never be able to eat an M&M again. But that's okay. I like Skittles more. It's fine. But it's a little interesting about these conversations regarding like what is sexualization and what is not. And I personally don't think having a character who is wearing like a long sleeve shirt and a skirt with boots is necessarily sexualizing or even feminizing the character. I think that's perfectly fine. And I also think it depends on body type. I'm someone that if I was wearing a suit with pants, like a one-piece suit with pants, I don't think I would be able to actually move. I would have to wear the skirt version, or I would just be stuck and like unable to walk. So I do think there's a little bit of, I don't know, shape that I don't know how to phrase this. Not imbalance, but like not necessarily discussing. Like women have different body types and can fit different clothes differently. And I think the actress playing Kara, Melissa Benoist, like she just happened to be someone more narrow, and that's more easily for her to fit into. But to say that that's empowering, I don't know. Like I feel like it's a little rude. Like because I like wearing heels. What? I'm like putting women down? That just seems kind of ridiculous to me. Like, I don't think that's the right message. Personally, like, I think for M&Ms, a better message, they all wear heels. That's inclusion.
Yeah, okay.
And that one M&M, I think someone said that one M&M needs to go to a counselor for his anxiety. That too. I think it's the orange one.
No, it was the orange one. It is the orange one.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about him now.
It's very interesting what they got going on.
But did you watch Masters of the Universe Revelations?
Yes, I absolutely loved that.
I did too. But there were I don't know if you read any of the Twitter backlash, because there was a lot of it, and it was pretty crazy.
I was like, oh, it's Star Wars all over again. Let's sit back and watch.
Yeah, it was insane. But a lot of people were talking about I have suddenly forgotten the main female's name. Tila, yes. They were talking about Tila, and they were saying, oh, she got a lesbian haircut. I was just really annoyed with that. So I took a picture of her, and I took a picture of old school. I just watched She-Ra more. So I took a picture of like old school She-Ra from the 80s cartoon, not from She-Ra and the Princess of Power. And I said, this strong woman with a short haircut, it can be totally heterosexual, very feminine girl. And old school She-Ra could totally be a hardcore lesbian. Your hair doesn't define these things.
Exactly.
But that kind of, in retrospect to our previous conversation, goes back to like coding. And for an invisible minority like being queer, there are a lot of physical and sometimes vocal attributes that queer people will take on as signifiers, as a kind of a wink and a nod. I don't need to say it because you're seeing this, like wearing something with a rainbow on it, being a female wearing plaid is something. There's a whole documentary called Do I Sound Gay, about the like gay lisp that some men have, which I can't really speak to, but hence I referenced the documentary.
Unfortunately, I can say someone I consider my brother's name's Ryan. A lot of Tristan, who I brought up earlier, a lot of the men I know have had the gay lisp, and it's like, it's going back in my head. I hear that and I'm like, yeah, I've definitely been coded to think that way. I've noticed, like, that's just even when you've seen gay characters on television and film, a lot of them tend to have that lisp. Did you see well, considering you're a horror fan, I take it you saw Candyman this year?
I haven't seen that one yet.
What? No.
I wasn't really going to the theater a lot. I don't know if that's on.
No, it's you can rent it now. It's probably going to be on streaming.
I'll wait till streaming.
I mean, I could send you a screen share of or a screen pass of my digital copy of it. No issue. As a thank you for doing this with me. But there's the main character's girlfriend's brother is gay. Even he and his partner had the gay lisp, and I'm like, okay, because even though the majority of gay men I've met in my life have that, I still have met a few who don't, and a few who, it's like those situations where it's like, oh yeah, I'm gay. If they hadn't told me, I would have never guessed.
Yeah, like it's kind of a way to. It's a way for like other people to know without necessarily you having to say that. Sometimes with English and grammar, sometimes not. But yeah, it's just something that kind of happened over time. I not something I can speak to as much, but in terms of like queer women getting like a haircut, or in terms of like dressing a certain way, these are just, I don't know, because you want to be, when you're in a community, you want to be a member of that community and you want to have like shared things. So it, in a way, kind of makes sense as to why these things develop over time, because it does kind of come back to that, like in community gatekeeping.
No, and you're right, and it's weird to just talk about that, because people joke, and I shouldn't say people joke, when the Masters of the Universe Revelation backlash is happening, and they were making them like, I know so many women who have like who are straight as all hell, shave their head, power just shorter hair. It's like my girlfriend is a hairstylist, so I see all different. Like I, I don't women. I don't really code as much, like because you never really know. I guess like I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. I feel like for guys, there's a lot more outward signs to if they are. I guess is a better way to
Probably.
say it. Um,
But also, I think that kind of comes down to our culture.
yeah,
And a movie that I kind of came down on thinking, did you see The Green Knight?
yes.
Okay, so beautiful movie. I actually really don't like it at all. Um,
I'm so mixed on it. I understand. I'm like I gave it a 4 because I loved the cinematography and certain aspects of it, and the acting. Like I love the acting and cinematography. I was like very mixed on the story.
have you read the poem?
Back in high school.
Okay. So I felt as though they took a lot of like very at the time or of the time normalized homosocial relationships, which just means for our society, for instance, in modern times, it's so much easier for women to like hold hands and not be in any kind of relationship whatsoever, just a platonic, just
Mm-hmm.
friends holding hands or like kissing and stuff like that. In Europe, it's more normal for men to have those types of relationships. Back in Arthurian times, because I can't off the top of my head remember what time period that
No,
was.
you're absolutely correct. It's Arthurian times because
Yeah, so I just meant that I can't remember what year.
Oh,
So
fair.
whatever years those were, it was more normal for there to have homosocial relationships between men. And yet in the film, they didn't tell us that Lord Bertilac is the Green Knight. And without that revelation, we don't learn that his wife isn't a witch temptress. She was asked by her husband to seduce Gawain, and we don't have the shared kisses between Gawain and Lord Bertilac. We only have one where Lord Bertilac is in a more physical position of power on a horse and leans down to kiss him in a little bit of a more predatory way that
Yeah.
Gawain is very kind of taken aback by. Whereas
Yes.
in the book, that is not at all what happens. So in 2021, to show this more demonized, like homosocial relationship between two men kissing, is I felt very regressive. And overall, the whole thing was just a really hollow, but beautiful
Yeah, it's very
reenactment
beautiful.
of
Very beautiful.
something that had no depth to it, which is unfortunate because it is a beautiful story and one that in modern times still works about telling the truth, which the film kind of by its omission and without its revelation doesn't even do.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And that's when I stopped going too deep on the Green Knight.
I remember I was like I saw how long that Green Knight video of yours was. I'm like, if I wanted to dig back into this movie, I'd watch that. But I'm like you. I'm like I could dig into like the stuff. I can nitpick that movie to hell, but still somehow land at a somewhat positive rating for it just because of I love the directing. I love the
I mean,
set
the
design.
cinematography was gorgeous,
Yeah,
absolutely,
I,
undeniably.
I was I like ultimately, and there are other movies I ding heavily for story, like uh Nightmare Alley. Nightmare Alley, more recently. I gave that movie like a 3 being nice because I liked the acting and the cinematography and all that. But I hated that I was able to, even though it's a noir film, I was able to figure out the entire thing in 30 minutes and I was left not caring at that point because I was like, oh, this is where we're heading and the journey wasn't that interesting. So I gave it a 3. But Green Knight,
Yeah.
I didn't see where it was heading. But I still the acting and the cinematography, all the stuff I gave the props to Nightmare Alley for. I gave the same props to Green Knight. One I gave it a 4, and one I gave it a 3. So I'm not. It's weird, I guess.
I know.
Sometimes
For
how you be a movie.
I watch a lot of really, really, really low budget movies that are just bad and weird. Insert Ouija Shark, $300 budget, fun times. And I watch a lot of really high like
Wait,
art
was that the
house
movie I
films.
saw you? Was that the one I saw you tweeting about the other day?
No, that was Sharks of the Corn. I've made it my mission this year to find the worst shark movie. It's a work in progress. It's only January.
Fair.
But anyway, and story is the one thing I'll still talk about in terms of low budget movies because I can give them a pass on everything else. But it doesn't matter what budget your movie is, you should be able to write a story that makes sense.
Yes.
And then that's the same for high budget movies. Like you can only do so much in terms of visuals before it's like, okay, it's pretty, but are you just pretty?
See,
it's like that stereotype of like the dumb blonde. Like you're gorgeous, but like anything going on up there?
See, and people get on me when I say I don't care for Avengers Endgame because I'm like the story is very weak and
Yes.
it's messy as all hell. I'm like, I love it. I love Infinity War. I don't care for Endgame whatsoever.
But also, my favorite movie is Back to the Future. And if you say Back to the Future is bullshit, you're getting a ding. That's just the rules.
I love Back to the Future. I got the 4K copies for Christmas, so I think I'm not gonna get a ding here. But no, I get it. Story. I know we kind of ventured a little bit off of the original topic, but I'm really digging talking to you about film and just in general because your thoughts.
But I can bring it back with The Green Knight.
Yes.
The Green Knight. There are a lot of like feminist film critiques, or basically people who critique film, but look specifically through feminist theory. Which, to be clear, I will say for clarity's sake, I hate feminist theory. I hate it so much.
You sound like my friend Lucia. I'm just putting that out there right now.
Oh, does she not like feminist theory?
Like she's like, I agree with parts of it, but overall it's bullshit.
Yes. Well, they went the early Laurel Mulvey, who kind of was the grandmother of feminist film critique, we'll call her, the one who came up with the male gaze. She went really heavy into Freud's psychoanalysis. That's a hard word to say. And then it wasn't until later on we start having books about these topics. The most famous would be The Monstrous Feminine by Barbara Creed, but we also have Clover and all these other women writing about it. And I don't know if people are familiar with academic writing. Usually in academic writing, you're taking something someone else has done and you're continuing it. Or you're continuing it and saying you disagree. But it's one of those two ways. You're still taking the thing that the other person has set up and continuing it. And because it was set up in a way that we're looking at Freud's psychoanalysis, it came off as very phallocentric model of thinking about women as like other and less, and thinking of men as just being these like, I think it asserts that men have a psychological compulsion to oppress women because they don't have a penis, and that makes men afraid of being castrated. It's just very strange. So anyway, it's strange, and that's why I don't like it. And sociology was right there, just waiting. Anyway, I forget which of them kind of came up with this idea that there are 3 female monsters in movies, which would be the castrator. Sorry, I keep using that word. The temptress and the witch. And when you watch movies, particularly horror movies, but even movies that aren't horror movies, even just like movies that have like female villains in them, you start to see that, this kind of repetition of what these females are being depicted as. Oftentimes, particularly with evil females, they're witches. And these do go back to like mythology, like if you look at Greek mythology, especially, like females are seen in kind of the same kind of repetitious things there too. Most famously probably would be Medusa, where you have like the woman so beautiful, she has snakes for hair and she turns men into stone. And it isn't until kind of recently that we start to see that we've taken these old legends and situations that women have been in, and these old like folk tales, and we're seeing them being repurposed to empower women. You probably haven't seen the horror movie Teeth.
I've seen bits and pieces of it.
Okay, so that actually was not an original concept. That is folktale. That is an old folktale that used to be told to young boys to make them fearful of wandering women and also to prevent them from
What?
going around and assaulting women because, teeth in places. I think even Kevin Smith referenced this in Clerks 2 with the
The
Heine
pussy
troll.
troll, yeah.
Yes,
Pussy troll.
pussy
Yeah.
troll. Very funny. But yeah, this is like an
And
old
then
thing. And more recently, we're seeing like now this is repositioned as being a place of empowerment for a woman to kind of, it is like a rape revenge tale. So it's kind of interesting that we see like over time things are allowed to change, but then we also see like right now they're trying to remake Snow White, and that's a whole pile of nope.
see, I agree with you, but at the same time, after West Side Story, I have a super huge spot or soft spot for Rachel Zegler. So I
I
gotta.
actually hate that she got cast, but I think for different reasons than most racists. In that I would prefer not a 20-something-year-old woman, but an actual child to play the role to really show how inappropriate this story is. When you have someone
Fair.
older, you don't feel as much pity, I think.
I think she's either only
She is
19 or
20,
20.
but
Yeah, yeah.
she's gone through puberty, is what I'm
Yes.
saying. You don't look at her and think,
Fair.
oh, she's 13. She's a
Fair.
kid, which is what I think would be much suitable for that story.
Yeah, I agree.
And also the whole, stepmom is an evil witch, not great, and she's envious of her younger counterpart for being more beautiful than her, not great. Like, we can stop telling that story anytime. And the dude kissing the girl in the coffin is real salty, not great.
See,
We
I'm
can
not
just
I'm not gonna
stop.
lie. Right now, you have me wanting to. Have you seen Spencer?
Seen what?
Spencer.
No.
It's the Kristen Stewart Princess Di movie.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't watched that yet.
Okay, like I'm not gonna lie, I would love to eventually have you watch that and get back on here and us talk about it because I think you would have a lot of fantastic thoughts on that film that I'd love to talk about with you.
I know it had a lot to deal with basically her having an eating disorder, and it really kind of focused on, I've heard, on that.
Yeah, yes and no. It more so focuses on the eating disorder is part of it, but her never really fitting in with the royal family.
Mm.
And Spencer, I for honestly, if I got to redo my top 10 list, Spencer would be on it. I put out my top 10 list in a haste towards the end of the year, like a lot of people, and Spencer was not on it. I regret that.
Oh, that made me think of something. You watched Encanto. I think
Yes.
that film did a lot in terms of how it portrayed women being in like kind of more classical roles where Julieta, the mother, she can heal you with a meal, which is a very like, I feel like that's a very mom thing.
Yes.
Her sister, Pepe, is very emotional and one might say hysterical, which is like a more, I don't know if people knew this, but the word hysterical comes from an old, I think, Greek word, which meant the womb, which is why that word is so tied to femininity, unfortunately. And it wasn't until World War II, I think, maybe World War I, when men were suffering from PTSD, when they started looking at, outside of like, now men are acting like this and we're not really sure why. Freud really fucked up that too. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about Freud. Maybe. I'm just saying, like, I learned from Stephen King, if you use a lot of cocaine, you might just have some weird ideas about sex. Anyway.
Yo, you have literally become one of my favorite people in this space after this one conversation. I'm just going to say that right
now. Anyway, where was I? But I love, and the character I related to the most was actually Isabella, which I feel like not a lot of people related to her as much as some of the other characters. Whereas with her, she was kind of put into this beauty standard, and she was, her family put a lot of pressure on her to maintain that. And I didn't hear anybody else talking about this, but at the end of the movie, this girl's out here having her goth phase, and I love that for her.
Right. I love it. She's like, I'm just gonna grow these real quick. Just say screw it, and there's black and blue and gray. I'm like,
yes, very fun. And then obviously with Louisa, we have this very strong woman, which normally I actually don't like when we depict women in animation like that, because I think it does tend to like masculinize strong women, which most women, even women who are bodybuilders or athletic, will not have that build. Although with the magical aspect of it, obviously she could.
yeah.
So that's totally fine.
You gave that one a pass. Okay.
Okay, yeah. But I love that she still wears a skirt, and she still wears, she still has, a more feminine side, and they really depicted that. And I mean, obviously Surface Pressure, that was my favorite song. It wasn't the best song, but I think that's the one that so many people could relate to.
So Surface Pressure, when I first started, we have the Google Home system, so there's a broadcast coming through. So that's why I muted myself for a second. So Surface Pressure, when I left the theater, was my favorite song, and I think overall, it fights with "We Don't Talk About Bruno" from my favorite song, but "We Don't Talk About Bruno" has been like an earworm, and it just keeps digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and I'm like, I found myself listening to "We Don't Talk About Bruno" and Surface Pressure like every day, at least for like the last 3 weeks.
Yes, they're both so good. I think "We Don't Talk About Bruno" is like more complex, so that probably makes it, a little bit more fun. And it's something that, in the United States, we don't really have songs like that very often.
Unless it's from Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, but with Surface Pressure, I think in terms of relatability, that's something more people could relate to.
Oh, yes.
Like what she's singing about. Plus, it's just good.
Yes, and I mean, Just Dara was fucking fantastic in that. Like, just praise. Loved it.
Also, you don't really see females with deep voices, or hear that rather. That's very unique.
Yes. No, we've been going for an hour and a half. There's a lot we've covered in this, and like I said, I'm enjoying talking about this to you because I like your perspective, and it's really interesting to be able to talk about that and break this stuff down. So if you're ever down to just talk in general, I'd love to have you back on, or even just talk in general or whatnot. But you want to tell people before we get out of here where they can find you?
Let's see. I do have a YouTube channel, and it is Legault LAND 13, Legoland 13. I do weird reviews. I'm gonna do a lot on bad shark movies, and maybe some Nick Cage movies. So if you're interested in that, pop on by. Also, sometimes I talk about more deep stuff, taking weird movies and overanalyzing them to death, because that's how you do. But everywhere on social media, it's Legoland 13.
So movies like The Green Knight are what you analyze to death. Got it.
No, I recently did 1 hour just all on the 3 Black Christmases. That was very long. I also did an hour on the Cowboy Bebop. That one got a lot of views, unfortunately. People love to hear people just hate Cowboy Bebop.
Were you doing the anime or the live action that you were talking?
Live action.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I've never watched the anime a day in my life. I was, or not AM. I never watched that anime a day in my life, so I was kind of fine with what we got.
It's because I don't know. I think even if I hadn't seen the anime, I don't think I would have liked it, because I just don't. I think the villain really fell flat for me.
I didn't say I liked it. I said it was fine. It was fine. It wasn't great. It wasn't good. It was fine. It would have, if it had gotten a season 2, I would have at least given it an opportunity to see if.
I actually wanted a season 2, even though I didn't like it.
Really?
Just to see if they could, if they would listen to kind of the critique, the legitimate critique, and maybe undo some of the bad will that they gained. But I mean, basically what I come down to of remakes and adaptations is, if you don't want to be compared to the original, call it something else. Otherwise, you're asking for comparison. That's just automatic.
That's fair. That's fair. But with that, everyone, thank you for checking out today's Real Talk. I know we went through a lot of deep stuff here, and that's not something we normally do. And that's kind of part of the reason I wanted to change that, because film is a lot more than just the popcorn stuff. There's real issues to talk about, and seeing someone talk about those issues openly on social media, and was like, you know what? No, I need to bring them on to talk about this because I've wanted to talk about this stuff. So, Legault, thank you again for coming on. And to everybody who's watching this or has watched it, remember to like, subscribe, follow, all that fun stuff we do over here on WAT Reel Entertainment. And we'll see you next time.